Hello, I'm Peter Waygang, the Secretary of the Citizens for Direct Democracy. This series of slides will deal with property taxes and how they are given to us and whether what we have right now is a fair system and whether it should be reviewed in some way. So we'll start right away with... Okay, this slideshow is going to deal with property improvements, property tax, and the murky role of MPAC. Now, we believe that values are the underpinning of all government, and they must be values which we all share in common. So a good society is based on those values, the values of fairness and trust and transparency and so on. The other thing is that good society is based in the community. It is not based upon our leaders, our politicians, or even on money. So these two things we believe are underpinning all legislation at all levels of government. So let's start by finding out what is property tax. It is not what most people think. It doesn't pay for our garbage collection, our police force, or emergency services, or libraries, or arenas, because if it did, then all of us would be paying more or less the same property tax. And as you know, some people in different locations, even across the street, in similar houses, are paying different property tax. So what is it paying? It's a tax on perceived wealth. Tax on perceived wealth. And who does the perception? Well, it's MPAC. They decide, by looking at our property, what it's worth, and therefore that the tax goes accordingly. And as you know, MPAC is the Municipal Property Assessment Company. It is in fact a not-for-profit organisation which does very well for itself, and it's taken over the roles which I believe are in the hands, or should be in the hands, of local government. So, if you have a nice house in a good location, then it is assumed that you have a lot of money. And if you have a lot of money, then you should pay a lot of tax. So property tax is really the municipal version of provincial and federal income tax. They look at the money as income tax. But it's based on a myth. This isn't true. Now this chap, Sir Settlewood, has explained it very well in his letter to the Toronto Star on September the 27th. He says, "Imagine a tax system based on the potential of something and not on the reality. What if Revenue Canada reassessed my income tax every year based on what they thought I should be making and not on what I in fact make? It sounds ludicrous, but that's the way the property tax system seems to work." And he goes on to say, but taxes need to be fair and based on a mutually agreed upon shared reality. And he finishes off by saying, we need to overhaul all the total antiquated property tax system. Now that is true, but I don't believe that we can do that very quickly. So we have an alternative suggestion which we'll come to later. Now, why is it that property taxes change? Well, it's because the values of your property change. But they can increase because of improvements to your own property. You may add additions or do something else to a house which increases the property. Then you can happen if your neighbourhood changes. So these are the two things that really change the property value of a house and thus your taxes. But these changes make people capital rich, but income poor. And I have an example from my own family. My cousin in England lived outside a city, and as the city spread, she found that the property value of the little house she was living in became more and more expensive. So she was capital rich. She was living in a very expensive house at the time because of the increase of all the properties around her. But she couldn't afford it, and so she had to move. So you can't afford the property tax because your property value has gone up not through what you've done to it, but because of what happens to you. So let's take the case. A young couple starting out in life, they say, well, when we retire, we want to retire to the country. here's this nice little house going very cheap. It's not very good, as you can see. We will buy it and we'll put some work into it, and when we retire, we'll be able to move there away from all the hustle and bustle of the city. So let's see what happens. This is what happens. The city grows. These condominium developers here, they don't wish any harm to this person in this little house here. But the fact of the matter is that that little house now is sitting on property which is so valuable that the people in it can no longer afford to pay the property tax. So they are in fact completely squeezed out. We don't think that's fair, and we think something needs to be done about those sorts of situations. There's another situation, typical row houses. This is an older one, perhaps in a suburban area, in some street somewhere, and see what happens. There, somebody with a lot of money comes in, bulldozes down that oldest house, puts up this great big mansion here, and what happens to these two people here? And that's me. All of a sudden our property taxes go up because this rich house has made the whole neighbourhood more desirable, and thus all the properties are going up. And this is actually happening right where I live. A chap 2 doors down has just built one of these houses, and so I, because he's built a big house, will have to pay more taxes, but nothing has happened to me at all. My income has not gone up, and my house has not improved or changed in any way. Now, here's another situation. Again, perhaps the young people getting into their first house. Eventually he buys a car and he decides he wants to build a garage. Here's the garage, not a very substantial one. But immediately, MPAC, in their wisdom, come around and they look at this and say, now your house is worth a lot more money. So therefore, your property value will go up, and so will your property tax. Again, we do not believe that that kind of situation is fair. Because when you make a home improvement, lots of good things happen. Clearly you've got to build some building materials are coming around, and you've got contractors to work for you. If you're doing some interior changes, you probably need to buy more furniture. Then your home designers are employed, and property maintenance firms come. And all these sorts of things are driving the economy because home improvements are encouraged. But right now they're not encouraged. Anything you do increases the value of your house, your property goes up, and your property taxes do as well. So we should encourage home improvements because they drive the economy. They create pride in homes and communities. There's nothing quite as nice as a really smart, well-kept community. And then they have a positive psychological value. There is some merit in doing work on your own property to make it look better. You feel good, and that's a good thing to have. Now, when the property is sold, then of course the properties go up to the actual market value. So there's a period of time here when perhaps the municipality does not get quite as much money, but you've got the economy increasing, and the province will eventually probably collect capital gains tax, and of course we have the land transfer tax. So we defer some instant money here for the municipality, but we've encouraged this economic drive, and they get the money in the end in any case. Now, if people are discouraged because they say, if I improve things, then I'm going to have to pay a lot more tax every single year, then people may incline not to do anything. And that's a very negative impact on communities and on the economy. Now, let's get straight to the MPAC scam. The MPAC is a non-profit organisation, and anybody who studied these know what they're about. They collect as much money as they can, preferably from the government, which is our taxes. And then they pay it to themselves, and they do some nominal work. This is a staggering figure. The Ontario municipalities paid almost $200 million to MPAC in 2016 to collect the data and to tell the municipalities what the property values were and therefore what the taxes should be. And look where that money went. The blue area is the salaries of the MPAC people. The orange area is their benefits. So that's almost 3/4. So it means that every one of our tax dollars that goes from us to our municipalities into impact ends up 75 cents going to this not-for-profit organisation. And that's the problem with not-for-profit organisations. They all do very well and they do very little. Now, impact boasts about its accurate property assessment, and that's just rubbish. There's no such thing as an accurate property assessment. All you can do is get a market value, and market values can come from realtors, and they also come from this firm called TerraNet. TerraNet is something we need to speak about. Okay, before we do that, I want to explain to you carefully what happens when you take a written database and change it into a digital database. This is our business card for citizens of direct democracy. Here's my name, Steve's name, John Snyder's, and here's our telephone numbers. Now I've put them into columns like this. Column of first names, second names, phone numbers. Now these in internet stuff, this is called a field. So we've got 3 fields, and you normally see these on a spreadsheet. Okay, let's move on. Now I've coloured them, so in order, the first field, the first name is a green field, and the second name, surname, is a blue one, and the phone numbers are here. If you take this information and you put it into another spreadsheet, you need 3 fields to get the information in. Okay. But the land registry, which we're talking about, which gives us the value of our house, etc., etc., it's got a whole lot of stuff in it. Names, dates, maps, liens, all these things are in there. So an intelligent person says, I will look at all the stuff we want, and then I'll make my spreadsheet so that it all fits in. That is kind of vital. All right. But that is not what happened. When TerraNet set up, it borrowed a software program from India, and the number of fields in that software didn't fit our registry, our land registry in Ontario. So what in fact happens is they say, well, we've got 3 things to put in, but we've only got 2 fields. So one of them we can't put in at all. Oh, too bad. But what happens is that you lose valuable information. You've got the 3 names of the people, but you can't phone them. So this is completely useless. And this is exactly what's happened in the transfer of the information from our government into TerraNet. And this is how it happened. The Ontario Land Registry was here. It goes back hundreds of years. Many of the documents were handwritten, and that's why I made this all nice and squiggly. There was a shell corporation created, and there was a secret contract. And what happened is that the government sold to this shell corporation the rights to run this whole show. And eventually it trickled through to TerraNet. But in the beginning, there were no staff, there were no money, no expertise. So this was a nothing organisation. Here was a cunning sleight of hand. Basically says, we will sell this to you, and then you fix everything afterwards, and you'll give us a lot of money, and that will go into the government. So TerraNet, they've developed it, and they own it. This is terrifying. They actually own the Ontario Land Registry, and they operate this thing, the electronic one. Now the same thing they tried last year in England, and this was the reaction there. Privatisation could destabilise all that is held dear, and by this they mean title to your land and your property, and lead to a chaos and mayhem for the housing market for the sake of a short-term return to His Majesty's Treasury. So in England they know exactly why this is. This kind of thing is to pump money into the government to pay down the debts, to make them look good, or to pay their salaries. So this is how this came about. But we're not finished. OMERS, the Ontario Municipal Employment Retirement System. It's very wealthy, 72 billion. This is the money that pays out pensions and things. But it owns a company called Borealis, and Borealis owns Terranet. So this is a very strange thing, because the people actually think that because it's called the Ontario Municipal Employees, that it's owned by the government. It's not owned by the government at all. It's a private company, which owns this, which owns this. And this group owns all the documents for the land ownership. And this Terranet is related to Equifax. And because they made Equifax Canada and Terranet Inc. signed a strategic partnership. Now the word strategic is a bit dodgy, but you can see something not very nice must be going on. Equifax has gone through a scandal that's hacked this year. It had 57,000 complaints. So these two are linked together. And lo and behold, up here, MPAC and the Ontario government and Terranet, they're all mixed in together as well to form this standardised digital database. The result of it is that these people can manipulate the land registry database, and you end up with something called title theft. And what happens here is you can erode the database very easily if it's in digital form. It's not so easy if it's a piece of paper. And suddenly you find that you can't prove that you own the property on which you live. And this chap here, Mark McDermott, who is an expert in this field, he gave a speech which I listened to the other day, and he's furious because his mother lost their farm by exactly this process. So here's a lot of mucky stuff. It's all tied up with politics and banks and so on and so forth. And it's something which a direct democracy government would never permit to happen in the first place. So, we've got the situation where representational government has betrayed the people. Let's just look at some of the recent ones. The 407 scandal. I looked this up, and we, the taxpayer, actually spent $100 billion to buy the strips of land which now have the 407 running through them. And it was sold for $3.1 billion. This is scandalous, because the truth is that the 100 billion was slipped in over the years in terms of taxes, and the 3.1 billion was pumped into the coffers of the Ontario government, and suddenly we can pay off some of our debts or pay higher wages to our civil servants. Next one, cancellation of the gas power plants, 2013. That cost us 950 million. But the key thing is here, and this is under investigation now. The $10,000 was paid to somebody to go in and clear off the hard drives so that all the emails now cannot be found, so they cannot be used in the courts. Sale of Hydro One, again, against a strong public opposition. It was a madness. Its object was to pump money into the coffers to pay down debts, etc. The lucrative contracts to green energy producers. Nobody fully understands that, when Ontario actually already produces more more electricity than they can actually use. Selling databases is the latest thing. We know that databases of information are traded regularly on the internet because customers and so on, customer lists are very important for selling stuff. But when you start selling the information that's held in trust by the government to a private organisation, then I think that you cross the line. And selling off the proper and dutiful obligations of government. By this I mean that if you're working for the government and the government has taken your money to put into a pension plan, then it should be the government which is managing that pension plan, not sending it off to somebody else who's making a big profit out of running it for you. So, we see that representational government is open to these things: corruption, cronyism, greed, power grabbing, deceit, mismanagement, growth of the bureaucracy, and rule by a leader, not by the people. That is what's wrong with the system of government that we have right now. So our suggestion is grandfathering. A solution is to grandfather the taxable value of the property when it is purchased. And it stays that way until it changes hands. And this is not a perfect solution, and we know that, but it would be a step in the right direction. and we think it is a step that was seen to be fair and reasonable. It would also make MPAC redundant, because MPAC comes out every 2 or 3 years and does every property in the province. But now you'd only need those properties which are changing hands, and that could be handled at the local level as it always was, by somebody from the small municipal office to come out, perhaps with a real estate agent, and make the assessment. Now, government will not give us direct democracy, we know that, but we must take it, and we must take it soon. And this is how that can be done. If we can get your support for government where your voice is always heard and where your vote always counts, and if we can start this at the municipal elections in the city of Quarter Lakes, this coming election, then we will have begun a long path back to true democracy and the rule by the people. Thank you very much. Well, I hope that opened your eyes to some of the bad things that go on in government as we now have it, and it also addresses the ethical issues which must be at the foundation of any decent society. We, the Citizens for Direct Democracy, we meet every second and last Thursday of the month in Bobcaygeon, and we would welcome you to come and join in our discussions. And also, we hope that you like these presentations and will indicate so on your screens. Thank you. The location of our meetings is in Bobcaygeon in the service centre there, the fine building which is now used for nothing really serious at all.